Hey guys, it's ETA Prime back here again. Today I'm going to be putting together a sub $300 gaming PC that is absolutely worth it. I mean, if you don't own a gaming PC right now and you've been looking to build something cheaper, I would definitely recommend doing something like this. There are literally thousands of different combinations that you can come up with these Optiplexes, and if you're a regular viewer of my channel, you know I love these things. These were originally designed for business purposes, but you can find them a dime a dozen now on Craigslist and eBay. And this one is no different. I picked this up recently on my local Craigslist for $60. And yes, if you're in the United States, you can find deals like this. You got to keep an eye on Craigslist and other buy, sell, trade apps. And you got to be ready to buy when it's posted. You can't ask somebody to hold this for you for a week. After all, it's a $60 computer that they're trying to get rid of. And this one happens to be a mid-tower Dell Optiplex 7020. For the CPU, we have an i5-4590 at 3.3 GHz. 8 gigs of DDR3 RAM, and a 500 gigabyte Western Digital mechanical drive. So as it sits right now, I'm not going to be able to do much gaming on it. This works great as a desktop if that's all you're looking for, but we do need to add a GPU and some extras. So I wanted to throw an SSD in here, $55, 480 gigabyte PNY. I also picked up a little caddy to hold that SSD in here real nicely. I'll still be utilizing the 500 gigabyte drive that came with it. I'm going to store my games on there, but I'm going to set the SSD up as my boot drive, and we'll be running Windows 10 on this machine. Now, as for the GPU, I couldn't go super high with this because it only has a 290 watt power supply built in, and it has proprietary wiring. Yes, you can buy an adapter and throw a decent power supply in here, but I really don't want to put much more money into it. So I opted for a lower powered card. It still requires an 8-pin connector, and this is a GTX 1660. Retail on these is around $200, but you can find them used on eBay for $150, and that's exactly what I got here. This is the ASUS 6GB 1660. This is the non-super version, and these are the ones you're going to find for around $150 used. Now, I thought about an RX 580, but recently I did a full build on one of those, so I wanted to go with this GTX 1660. And in the end, this is a less power-hungry card, and we're going to be using a SATA adapter to 8-pin connector. This little Optiplex here has 2 extra SATA connectors that I'm not going to be utilizing in this unit. They were originally for the disk drive up top, so we can go ahead and unplug them and use a little 8-pin adapter. Now, we're still working with the 290 watt power supply, and to tell you the truth, this is pushing it a little bit. I originally thought about a 1650 that doesn't require any extra power, but I wanted to get a little bit more out of this machine. So that 1660 I believe is going to be perfect for this setup. So I'm going to go ahead and slap this thing together real quick, but first up I do want to change the thermal paste on this CPU. I ran some initial tests without a GPU installed, and it seemed like the CPU was getting a bit hot while running a few benchmarks. So I think some new thermal paste will definitely help out, and after all, I have no clue how long this has been on there. It's probably never been changed, and this is the factory paste. I know it's a bit hard to see on camera, but this paste is all dried out. It has seen better days, and this will definitely help out with cooling. Like I mentioned, I did run some tests really just to see if the PC worked. And the CPU was jumping up to around 65 to 70 degrees Celsius in some of my tests, and it just didn't seem normal. So yes, I definitely recommend swapping the paste out on your used PC. I'm going to be using some MX4 here. It's not my first choice, but it's all I had laying around, and it's going to work fine with this machine. So I got the paste swapped out, got the cooler back on, now it's time to install the SSD. Most of the time when I build a machine like this, I double-side sticky tape these SSDs in here. I don't need anything to look nice, but this time I figured I'd order a little bracketing system here, and I actually had another caddy laying around for these Optiplexes. So I'm going to go ahead and install this. We got that 480 gigabyte drive going in. So it fits in here nicely with those dual caddies. And for the SATA cable itself, I'm going to use the one that was used for the DVD drive. I didn't have to buy any extras here. There's 2 installed in this PC, and we're going to go ahead and use that for the SSD. All that's really left to do is install the GPU, and it looks like there was 2 cards in here at one time. I'm sure they had some type of dedicated GPU in here, like an older little AMD or something like that. Now it's time to put the GTX 1660 in here. Another one I thought about was a 1060. It does pull more power than the 1660, but I do have one in stock. I mean, in my possession. Problem is, it's way too long for a case like this. These Optiplexes have a little snap lock here, and as long as your GPU isn't too heavy, they work fine. Now it's time to install that 8-pin. We're going to plug it into the GPU, and I'll grab those extra SATA power adapters that were originally for the DVD drive and the disk drive up top. Plug them right in. And there we have it. We've got the new SSD installed, the 1660, and I've added some new thermal paste to the stock cooler. All I need to do is install Windows 10 on that new SSD, get everything loaded up, and start testing. Okay, so after a little bit of time, we are ready to go. As you can see, we have the i5 4590 at 3.3 gigahertz, 8 gigs of DDR3, 1600 megahertz. We have the SSD and the 500 gigabyte drive here, and the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1660. One thing I really wanted to check was that temp on the CPU, because like I mentioned, I was getting some high temps when I first booted this up to check it out, but after adding that thermal paste, we haven't hit 60C, and I ran a few benchmarks like Cinebench and 3D Mark Time Spy, so we should be good to go here. Alright, so first things first. I did want to run a Geekbench real quick, single core, 922, multi 3064. This is Geekbench 5, so these numbers might look a little bit low if you're used to Geekbench 4. Overall, really not bad, especially for a $60 CPU or a $60 PC with that CPU pre-installed. Next up was 3D Mark Time Spy. Total score on this machine here, 4,756, graphics score, 5,321, CPU, 2,971. We are better than 35% of all other results. Like I mentioned, I recently did a build with an RX 580, and this one actually has the RX 580. It's a 4GB model with an i5 7400. Total score on this was 3828. Now the CPU definitely came ahead of the older 4th gen that we have in this, but the GTX 1660 was much faster than the RX 580 here. So we got a much better overall score. Now it's time to see how this thing really performs. I'm going to test 10 games in this video. Some are going to be gameplay, some are just going to be the benchmarks, but most of all, these are games that I personally like playing. First up, we have Dauntless, 1080p, ultra settings, and we're getting an average of around 120 FPS. This is more than playable, and yes, I do have the resolution scale set to 100%. Next up, we have Doom Eternal, 1080p, high settings using the Vulkan backend. And I did have Afterburner running, but sometimes it just doesn't show up when I swap between OpenGL and Vulkan, so we do have the built-in metrics up in the top right-hand corner. When it was all said and done, I took a look at my Afterburner log, and I was getting an average of 138 FPS with this one. Here we have Subnautica, and I'm really not sure how to benchmark this. I mean, in certain places, performance is worse than others, but overall, this is playable on a system like this. You will get over 60 FPS in most cases. Every once in a while, you will see it dip if there's a lot going on underwater, but for the most part, Subnautica will be very playable. PUBG, 1080p, high settings, we're getting an average of 97 FPS. I was actually pretty surprised by this, but this is a very well optimized game for x86 on a PC like we have here, and the mobile version. So here's CSGO, and I really had no doubt that it was going to run fine on a machine like this. 1080p, high settings. By the end of this, I was getting an average of 165 FPS. And one of my favorite games of all time, this is Skyrim, the special edition version. Ultra settings, 1080p. You can max this out at 60 all day long. Moving over to some in-game benchmarks, first up we have Far Cry 1080p, high settings, really great performance here because we came out with an average of 76 FPS, a maximum of 98 and a minimum of 52. Next up, we have Forza Horizon 4 1080p with the high preset. I didn't mess with anything else, just set the preset to high. We achieved 110 FPS in this benchmark, and by the way, adaptive resolution is completely off. And I got two more harder ones to run. We have Assassin's Creed Odyssey 1080p, high settings. We got an average of 51 FPS. I really didn't even go back and test medium settings here, but I'm sure performance would be pretty decent. Overall, this is just a harder game to run. And finally, Red Dead Redemption 2. I tested the high preset without changing anything, and then I went with my custom medium preset. Basically, with the custom medium preset, I just go through and turn everything to medium. High settings, we're getting an average of 45 FPS, and custom medium, 59. Feels really good here at 59, and if you went through and tweaked it a little more, I'm sure you could get well over 60. So in the end, I'm really impressed with the performance of this little machine given what I paid, and I'll go over all of that in just a second. But one thing I was worried about going into this with the 1660 was that 290 watt Dell power supply. So I did a little bit of testing. I do have a kilowatt meter plugged into the wall, and while I was running Cinebench R20 and Unit Engine Heaven Benchmark at 1080p extreme settings, we only managed to pull 197 watts from the wall. And that's complete system draw with the CPU and the GPU maxed out. Under normal gaming circumstances, I saw a maximum draw of 147 watts, and that was with Red Dead Redemption 2. So we're definitely not maxing out this power supply, and it should be plenty for this 1660. So it's definitely not the prettiest PC on the block, but this is a solid performer, especially given the price that you can build something like this for. So I picked up the tower on Craigslist for $60. We had the CPU and RAM, that was the base of the system. I added a 480 gigabyte SSD for $55, an SSD caddy for $14, and the U1660 for $150, bringing the total cost of this build to $279 US. And yes, you can also build something like this for a similar price. You just have to keep your eye out on your local Craigslist, OfferUp, Facebook Marketplace, and eBay. You gotta be ready to buy when the parts are available. But that's pretty much it for this video. I really appreciate you watching. I think this is a solid build, and it should perform really well with emulation also. I will have a full video coming up, so stay tuned to the channel. I'll leave some links in the description to parts I used to build this up. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And like always, thanks for watching.